Thanks to Shopify for supporting Future Hindsight. Shopify is a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like us the resources once reserved for big business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. Welcome to Future Hindsight, a podcast that takes big ideas about civic life and democracy and turns them into action items for you and me. I'm Mila Atmos. It's 2024, and the future of America is in your hands. Democracy is not a spectator sport, so we're here to bring you an independent perspective about the election this year and empower you to change the status quo. Voting, as we all know, is a big part of democracy, and frequent listeners of the show are fully familiar with my oft-mentioned statistic of paltry New York City mayoral election turnout as evidence of a deep disconnect between us, the voters, and our political power. We've also heard that voting is tautological. People who vote, vote. People who don't vote, don't vote. One theory is that voting is a habit that is best ingrained early in life, and another is to make voter contact on a continuous basis, all year round, all the time, whether there are elections around the corner or not, to connect public policy to the lived experience of everyday people. We're excited to be speaking with someone who is doing exactly that. Our guest today is Mandela Barnes. He's the president of Power to the Polls Wisconsin, served as lieutenant governor of Wisconsin from 2019 to 2023, and is also the founder of the Long Run Political Action Committee. Welcome, Mandela. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mila, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
It's an election year, so of course we are worried about increasing voter turnout, which is your main mission at Power to the Polls. But just to set the stage, what's at stake in Wisconsin this year? Tell us about the races and ballot measures that you're most invested in.
Well, certainly turnout is top of mind, but more important is voter engagement. That's how you get turnout. I tell people all the time, even though we are a grassroots organization, you don't increase turnout simply by knocking on doors and telling people to show up. You get people to vote when they see results and when information is communicated effectively and properly to them. With that being the case, this is an organization that started in March of 22, so we're about a 2-year-old organization now. I came on board early last year as president, knowing exactly what's at stake in Wisconsin. Now, when I ran for the U.S. Senate, my race was decided by fewer than 30,000 votes. It was a 26,000 vote. It's a 1-point margin. The President Biden in 2020 won Wisconsin by around 30,000 votes. Donald Trump won by fewer than 30,000 votes. So very narrow margins. And when so much is riding on the outcome of Wisconsin, I like to look at us as the anchor of democracy. In this election, that is especially true. We know exactly what we're up against. We have a former president who is campaigning once again, saying that he'll be a dictator on day one, even going so far as to suggest there will be violence if he is to lose this election. That is what we're up against right now. A person who has only himself to care about, someone who has served as president before and left so many people behind. Now, this is where we have to make that connection because there's still too many people who aren't super excited about this race. And I was just at an event a couple days ago and I said, well, look, I know that there are a lot of folks in this audience who are not super excited about their choices this November. I understand it. There are probably some people in this very active room who may stay behind or know some people who may stay home this November. We cannot allow that to happen. There's far too much at stake, whether it's women's rights, whether it's our democracy itself, whether it is our global standing or our position on making sure that Americans have opportunities when it comes to healthcare, a living wage. The list goes on and on and on. And with that, I try to talk about the things that have happened over the last 4 years. There have been some remarkable pieces of legislation that have been passed. The Inflation Reduction Act, the single biggest piece of legislation to help curb carbon emissions and to provide opportunity for renewable energy. And unfortunately, because there are so many syllables in the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of people tend to tune out. A lot of people don't take the time to think about what's in there or do the research to find out. And that is one of many lanes that Power to the Polls has been finding an avenue to have conversations with people. Now, our work on the door since September of 23 haven't been persuasion doors. We haven't been showing up or leaving saying, hey, you should vote for President Biden. We are showing up talking about their lives. We're asking questions and we are listening, because in order for us to be able to get any sort of credibility, we have to first have some sort of understanding and a willingness to understand. That's sometimes what a lot of these operations get wrong, that show up 90 days before an election, and we don't get the level of engagement we need to then increase turnout. So engagement has been the most important factor of our work at Power to the Polls, and we plan to continue to thoroughly engage from now all the way throughout November and beyond. We are building year-round organizing infrastructure. We have 250,000 specific voters that we aim to talk to about 6 times between last September and Election Day.
Amazing. Well, thanks for this great overview of all the things that you're doing. Let's get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. You're doing a lot of outreach to voters. Like you said, you started talking to them back in September of 2023. Tell us a little bit more about how you're doing this outreach. You mentioned you do a lot of events. You don't really go door to door in terms of trying to get them to get out the vote. But what is the shape of your outreach? And when you're speaking with people, you mentioned that they don't really connect the Inflation Reduction Act to their daily lives. But what are the issues that they actually want to talk about with you?
Yeah, now I do want to clarify one piece because we have been active at doors. We've knocked on over 50,000 doors since last September. And I just want to say that our conversations up until this point have not been persuasion conversations. We've been doing temperature checks for the most part. We want to have a real conversation with people so that people can be upfront and honest with us about what they're feeling, why they do or do not plan to vote. You know, around the summer and fall, of course, those conversations will shift. But for now, it is about building those relationships. And I will rewind time back to April of 2023 when we elected a new Supreme Court Justice, Janet Protasewicz, in a very hotly contested, a very watched Supreme Court race that gave liberals a majority for the first time in at least 15 years. And Power to the Polls was very active in that race. We had over 175 organizers on the ground, knocked over 88,000 doors, and every ward that we were present in, every ward that we targeted saw an increased turnout. I am glad that we were a part of the coalition that helped elect her. We'll not take all the credit for ourselves because that's not the truth. It takes a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of work to make it happen. However, there's a critical piece of election infrastructure, especially going into November 24, that sees a significant portion of Black voters, brown voters, working class voters being disaffected, also being targeted by disinformation. This is a deadly combination for our democracy. What we have been doing and what we will continue to do is knock on doors as we did last year, but we also did digital. We also did targeted mail. We also did radio. We will be doing all those same things. And we also will be employing some other tactics as well, doing more community engagement events, bringing in the folks who aren't your typical political influencers, but the people who have credibility in communities already. There's a big artist scene here in Wisconsin, especially in the city of Milwaukee, amongst Black and brown youth, even Black and brown adults. And we want to engage them in the process. But those conversations also require us doing some groundwork and building some relationships, because everybody is not just on board as they were in 2008 and 2012. This is an entirely new day. Things have changed and people are demanding results. There is a certain immediacy to everything that goes on these days. People expect a whole lot, but I'm not going to say people shouldn't expect a whole lot. People have seen their quality of life diminish year after year. People see costs increase. People have also seen wages increase, but not at the same rate. People have been struggling. People have been frustrated. But one of the things we've been talking about on doors is how the president has created jobs specifically that give opportunities to Black and brown youth and Black and brown adults. We talk about the fact that prescription drug costs have been lowered with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Affordable Connectivity Program that reduces home internet costs by $30. These are things that are having a real-time impact, but there's still so much more work to be done. And we remind people that that the election is one piece of this much, much bigger puzzle. Showing up to vote is necessary, yes. However, what happens after the ballots are cast is the most important thing. We need to be sure that we are holding our elected leaders accountable. We need to be sure that people understand that their power isn't just at the ballot, that their power is at city hall meetings, is at the courthouse for their county board, or even in state legislative hearing rooms. And when people start to become more civically educated, people become more involved, that increases trust in the process, because folks don't always know that they are actually a part of it. Government, politics is too abstract for people. We want to make it very clear. We want to make it very plain. We want to make it very tangible. And that work isn't just done over one election cycle. It's going to take time for us to get to that place. But we have to start the groundwork, which has already been in motion for a number of years. But we have to keep layering it on every single chance we get.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just mentioned state lead, and you mentioned Justice Protasevich, who made it possible for Wisconsin in December to overturn the Republican gerrymandered maps. And in February of 24, the legislature adopted new fair maps. Now that Wisconsin has fair maps, what kind of legislation do you expect to be passed in the state lead? Because that, in many ways, is much more relatable to the everyday life of people as opposed to something as big as the Inflation Reduction Act.
So I served in the legislature for 4 years, and I think about the most important legislation to people across this entire state that never got to see the light of day, whether it is legalization of marijuana, whether it is expanding our Badger Care program, because I have to remind people every time Wisconsin is one of about 10 states now that has yet to expand our Medicaid program under the Affordable Care Act. The fact that the legislature has stood in the way of significant and bold action on the climate, the fact that, we still have a $7.25 minimum wage in Wisconsin. All these things are egregious if you look at what's going on across the entire country. Our Republican-controlled legislature, because of gerrymandering only, has held Wisconsin back from so much opportunity. Fairer maps give Wisconsin a chance to do the right thing, to actually enact the will of the people. In the governor's conference room, there's some lettering on the wall, or on the ceiling, I should say, that says, "The will of the people is the law of the land." It has been the complete opposite since 2011. The will of the people has been disrespected. The will of the people has been ignored. But with fair maps, we can finally see things happen in the interests of the people of the state of Wisconsin, the things folks have been longing for, the things people have been organizing for, the things, quite frankly, that people deserve to have a better life here in a truly amazing state. We've just been, ill-governed by the legislature for far too long.
So now that you have fair maps, do people know that when you go to the doors, when you speak to people, are they aware that there are new fair maps and that you can connect the dots between holding electeds accountable, finally, in this new regime and what they can potentially demand with new government or new lawmakers?
So even when I was lieutenant governor, we got a lot of complaints like, "Oh, well, you guys won. What now? Why hasn't this changed? Why hasn't that changed?" It's like, well, let me explain the legislative process to you. And, we walk people through. This is a conversation that was had all too often, walking people through the legislative process and letting them know exactly why our agenda, which was the agenda of the people, remains that way, why it has been stalled. And so, having that conversation with people about fair maps does give people hope. It does give people hope that things can change, that they will finally have representative government and responsive government. And when people feel as if their votes actually do count, which should always be the case, they tend to get more involved in the process. They tend to get more passionate about the issues at hand. And if some of the most extreme members of the legislature have to think about more than a primary challenge, they oftentimes think twice about the policies that they're proposed, the harmful pieces of legislation that they have championed in an effort to appease a far right base, and they think more about the whole.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's a really hard thing to get to, though. You have served in state legislatures, so you know. I'm curious about how you persuade people to vote, actually, because you mentioned that some people are not excited and they're going to stay home no matter what. It's difficult to connect the dots. And so, in your experience, what have you found to be the secret sauce to motivate people to actually turn out to vote? Like the thing that sets off alarm bells. And you're like, oh, I got to do this. I got to register. I got to vote. Where do I go?
Well, I tell people that it is about the future. And I go out a whole lot talking to people about voting. I talk to undecided voters, whether it's undecided about who they'll vote for or if they'll show up at all. And this is done even when I'm not on the ballot. And I always make it very clear, like, I am not here to ask for your vote. I am asking you to vote. I'm not even on the ballot. That's how important this is. And I'd say this is the most important election, every election, because that is the truth. I was actually on a panel not too long ago, and somebody asked the question, said, well, every time there's an election, you always say, this is the most important election. This is the most important election. And then they'll say, aren't you feeling like the boy who cried wolf? And I'll say, when have I said that and it wasn't true? Regardless of the outcome, it is always the most important election. Every election has more consequence than the next, especially now. And for people who are still like, this doesn't change me, this doesn't do anything for me, I'll say, well, I guarantee you that this election impacts somebody that you care about, somebody somebody who can't vote, whether they have a blemish on their record and they don't have the right to vote anymore, whether it is a young person in their lives that may see their schools on the chopping block because of a lack of funding, whether it is an elderly family member that can't get access to the prescription medication that they need because of affordability concerns. Whatever the issue is, it can be anything. And, sometimes I got to take it even further and say, oh, look, whether you vote or not, this is not going to impact me. This outcome has much more of an impact on your life than it will on mine. Coming from an organizing perspective, we're taught that we work to organize ourselves out of a job. What's important to me is making sure that Wisconsin is a state that truly provides opportunity to children in every corner in all 72 counties. And in order for us to truly be a part of this process, we have to show up. You cannot sit here and tell me that things are going right or things are going well. And I will also tell you that I didn't get involved in this because I thought things are going well. I didn't put my name on the ballot. I'm not campaigning for this cause or candidate because I think things are going well. I am doing this because I believe that things can be better. And this is the way that we make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so inspiring. So Wisconsin has been hotly contested between the presidential candidates. Trump won, as you said, in 2016, very narrowly, Biden narrowly in 2020. So it's getting a lot of attention now. What are the demographic forces at play in Wisconsin? How purple is the state?
Well, I know from experience that we are very purple. I would like to think that we don't have to be this way. Wisconsin has a proud progressive history. We have been the first at many things throughout or since our founding. First state to ratify the 19th Amendment. We were the first state to declare the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. We were the first state to have anti-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation on the books or ability. And given that we have been here before, given that we have set an example for the rest of the country so many times in our past, setting up the first model for a Social Security system, the first state with public sector collective bargaining. I do believe that our best days are ahead of us, but that only happens when we have the political credibility to make that happen. And that hasn't always been the case. I remember participating in elections in years past while I was in the legislature, campaigning for other people, or, during my time, doing organizing work in the past life. I couldn't always say what my candidates or Democrats or progressives were campaigning for, what they stood for, what they wanted to do. I just knew that they weren't Republicans. And that's not enough for people who aren't as deeply involved in this work as I am. And, witnessing that and seeing the real lack of enthusiasm is incredibly frustrating. And it makes me want to push and challenge our candidates even more to show up for the communities that we need to show up for, or that we need to show up on election time. The days of showing up a couple weeks before an election or going to somebody's door on election day, say, hey, come out and vote. That still has some effectiveness to some degree, but nowhere near what it once was. People need to know, what have you done for me lately? People need to know why it is worth their time to get out the house, to take off work, to do whatever they need to do to cast a ballot, when the feeling is that everybody is going to get in there and do the same thing. So we have to highlight the wins, and we have to take some responsibility, accountability for the losses, but talk about the path forward and to be very open and honest with people about why things have or have not happened.
We're taking a short break to hear about our sponsor, Shopify, and we'll be back with Mandela Barnes in a moment. But first, Hall and Oates, SpongeBob and Patrick. What about the perfect duo when it comes to growing your business? That's you and Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling superhero posters or offering custom sunglasses, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. You heard that right. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify has got you covered. Shopify also helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. It's the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way, because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/hopeful now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/hopeful. We also want to share about a podcast we think you'll enjoy called Political Gabfest.
The 2024 election means this year is going to be chock full of drama and nail-biting suspense. You deserve a politics and news podcast with expert analysis, no spin, no BS, just trusted journalists talking about what you need to know. I'm David Plotz, and each week on Slate's Political Gabfest, I sit down with the New York Times' Emily Bazelon and CBS News' John Dickerson to do just that. Join us as we unpack the latest in politics, news, and the courts. Listen to the Political Gabfest every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, let's return to my conversation with Mandela Barnes. You talked about the enthusiasm gap, and we're definitely feeling this across the country, not just in Wisconsin. What do people tell you about why they're not enthusiastic this year? Because for me personally, it feels a little bit like, okay, we're doing the same race as we did in 2020, and my God, why are we doing this again? But maybe people are saying different things to you.
Yeah, so a lot of it isn't necessarily grounded in fact. Sometimes people will hear something somebody else said and just take it as law. Now, there are people who will say, yeah, my life was, better under Donald Trump. And some people will point to stimulus checks. And you have to dig a little bit deeper into people's true economic condition. Like, we're talking about a $1,500 check. And mind you, President Biden also delivered stimulus for the American people, more so than the former president. But this signals a much deeper problem with income inequality in this country. If somebody can see a former president who bragged about sexual assault, somebody who's facing multiple indictments at once, someone who has been so disastrous in approach to the office of president, where people are willing to dismiss it because of a $1,500 check, we got real problems to solve in this country. Not to mention the work of civic education and understanding also, President Biden actually has delivered more, but it's about breaking that down. And then there are also different perceptions that people have about age, ignoring the fact that Donald Trump is not much younger. I tell people all the time, I'm not concerned about that. I know young people who have terrible politics, younger people, right? I've served with some in the state legislature, right? And I don't care if it's somebody my age, if they have bad politics who's running for president. That's not the thing that's going to get me out the door. It's not the thing that's going to get me excited to vote. The thing that's going to get me out to vote is a real vision for this country. And I do believe that the president, during his State of the Union address, did just that. He made it all about the future. And then you have the juxtaposition of a much younger U.S. senator from the state of Alabama who brought us back to the past with almost every sentence. As a country, only operating off of fear, also proposing a vision that leaves so many people behind. That is not the future. I couldn't think of a more regressive approach to a State of the Union response. The choice is very clear because that's emblematic of her entire party, a country that wants to take us back, wants to deny rights, wants to keep people out. People will talk about love for a country, and it's so disingenuous because a lot of these people who claim to love the country cannot be telling the truth because they don't have love for everybody in this country. They want to cast people aside. They want to push people out. It is a very singular idea of the United States that they have, that they are in love with. And it is not the United States as it is today. It is a United States of the past that denied rights to women, that denied rights to people of color, kept people from the ballot box, kept people in living conditions that continue to promote this level of inequality that we're experiencing.
Well, you just mentioned that really we need to be in coalition with all the people who are invested in the way that the United States actually is today and is going to continue to be into the future. We're going to continue to have women. We're going to continue to have more diverse populations, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that you work with partners on the ground. Who else are you working with and doing the outreach around the year? What are the partnerships that you are most actively engaged in, and how does it work in your everyday work?
Exactly. So Power to the Polls was started by Wisconsin's labor, faith, and civil rights leaders. Different organizations came together to start this program that was very much needed. And these continue to be our partners today. We have a big contingent of faith leaders, and we have different community leaders who have had their history, have had their time in organizing and want to contribute to the work of Power to the Polls and making it a success. There are a number of other groups that are doing similar organizing work, and we don't see ourselves in competition with them. We see ourselves in concert. We can't spend our time at all in some sort of quarrel or squabble with people who are trying to effectively do the same exact thing. I think that's ultimately how we ended up in this place right now. It is up to all of us to join forces to be a strong organizing unit as possible for us to win. It is frightening that the polling suggests, and look, you can take polling with a grain of salt. You can look at it however you want to look at it. But we know, again, what the numbers show. In 2016, Donald Trump won fewer than 30,000 votes. 2020, Joe Biden won fewer than 30,000 votes. So however you want to look at it, the fact is the polling shouldn't be this close if you believe it or not. There is no reason why the most disastrous president of my lifetime, Donald Trump, has a fighting chance this November. And it is up to us to make sure that we have an educated public, an educated electorate who's ready to go to the ballot box to make an informed decision.
Well, I want to note here that the 2024 Republican National Convention will be held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin this year in July. What's the feeling in Wisconsin around that?
Yeah, I'm going to sit here and tell you right now, I did not want this to be the case for Wisconsin. I've said as much before. I don't think that it is good to welcome some of the worst people. And when I say worst people, I mean RNC leadership that has just been installed by the former president. This is who I'm talking about right now. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the former president's cronies who are leading what was once at least a credible political party in terms of pure definition, regardless if I agree with them or not. This is not a political party. This is an affront to our democracy. This is an organization of Donald Trump loyalists and lackeys who will take whatever dangerous approach to not just campaigning, but to governing if given the chance. These are the same people who showed up in Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin, and tried to decertify our elections, looking at every single voter, whether they voted for him or not, and said that your vote doesn't matter, your vote doesn't count. This is the way we want it to be. It's getting beyond, quasi-dictatorship. This is ascending dictatorship, if you will. There is every signal that could be shown, that could be flashed about what they will do. And the idea that Donald Trump will have a coronation in my hometown is something that disgusts me completely. I don't think this is a good idea. And, there are people who will talk about the economic impact of having this sort of convention in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. I think about the social impact of having this take place in Milwaukee. And I don't think that trade-off makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like a prequel to what is going to happen if he gets elected, or even if he doesn't, as he has said.
I mean, I think it's sort of short-sighted. Yeah,
it's short-sighted. I
think it's short-sighted.
Totally. Well, so you've been in Wisconsin politics for over a decade.
Oh boy, don't say it that way.
But what I'm trying to say is that you're a pro. You're not an amateur. You're not new to the show. Organizing and communicating with Wisconsin voters. You ran for Senate in 2022. You served as lieutenant governor. But what I'm wondering here is, how has your view on voters evolved over that time? Because I think voters have changed. And
voters have certainly changed.
Yeah. So how have they changed in your mind? And consequently, how is it making you think differently about motivating people to vote, about electioneering?
So voters have certainly changed, and that's to be expected. It's evolution, right? And social evolution happens much quicker than human evolution itself. And as things should change socially, I don't think that my party has always moved with that change. And you have people within the party who are pushing, who are doing the right thing, who are, ready for the change to happen and trying to make it so. But that process had not moved at the rate that it should have. And I do think that's what happened in 2016. 2018, one of the most hopeful times in Democratic politics, and I would say the nation. 2012, you saw a little bit of that dissipate. But by 2016, it was time to pivot. And I don't think that pivot happened effectively. I don't think there was a thing that was presented to the American people as it should have been to generate the sort of enthusiasm that we had 8 years prior. And we had historically low turnout in 2016, and we ended up with the president that we had, and that spiraled everything into chaos. There was a lot of dissatisfaction amongst people. And then also because of it, there was distrust, and you saw fissures began to show within the party. And right now it is up to us to figure out how to unite. Will that happen before November? It has to happen at least, where we reach a critical mass of coalition to get to that point. I'm doing everything I can to make sure we win this November. When we win this November, because we have to, that doesn't mean that we did everything right. That means that we need to take a hard look at ourselves and do even more to grow as a party, to grow as a movement, to strengthen ourselves. There's no time for victory lap. And in fact, it's time for us to get back in the gym, shoot some free throws. I certainly have changed, just having experienced a whole lot more than I have when I first got elected 12 years ago. I have a deeper understanding of the entire state of Wisconsin, where, I was previously Milwaukee focused. That is home. But now I can say confidently, I know my state front to back. I know the ins and outs. I know the good, the bad, the otherwise. And having this more deep understanding has helped me grow as an individual, not just in politics, realizing our differences as a people, but also our strengths because of that diversity. Ultimately, now versus where I was in 2012, I think I'm probably even more fired up than I was back then. The drive is even more so apparent than it was at that point. I think that I'm more focused than I was and more knowledgeable than I was.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned something interesting just now about 2016 and the party having missed an opportunity to pivot and make it exciting. I definitely think that was, for a lot of Democrats, a little bit like, why are we having these two candidates? But one of the things that I'm always wondering as an everyday person, not a politician, is the Democratic Party actually has a deep bench of really good candidates, like really good politicians, from coast to coast, honestly, in all pockets. And it's really impressive. And I'm wondering why they're not being called on to run for more high-profile national office. And I'm also wondering in that context about the political action committee that you founded, the Long Run. What was the gap that you were trying to fill with this PAC, and how is it going?
Yeah, so I'll say, as far as the deep bench, because that is very true, some of it is wait your turn, and some of it is sometimes good candidates don't always take risks because it's not easy. You could lose. I am proud of the risks that I've taken, whether I've won or I've lost. I don't want to look back and say, what if, or maybe I should have done that. Even the race that I did not win in 22, I have zero regrets about running it. I have zero regrets about stepping aside as lieutenant governor and running for the United States Senate. Would do it over again in a heartbeat, even knowing the outcome. For some people, that's just not their thing. You get into a spot and sometimes you can get comfortable, and that's totally fine, right? We want people to excel in the roles that they are in. And with the Long Run, the political action committee that I started, when I talk about it, I talk about one commercial in particular that aired during the campaign, and it ended by saying, Mandela Barnes, different. And I had the opportunity during the first debate with my opponent in the campaign. The moderator said, well, there's been a lot of money spent on TV advertising, and y'all are both claiming that things are not true, and we want to give you a chance to clear some of that up. And my opponent took one of the abortion commercials that we ran that clearly stated his position. And I said, well, instead of clearing something up, I wanted to actually lean into one of them. And it was the commercial that said Mandela Barnes different. I want to embrace that because I think this is the problem with the United States Senate right now, that it is too much of the same and it does not reflect the United States of America. This is a body that is completely out of touch with the American reality, with the American experience. And because it is not different, it is completely ineffective. We need more working class people in the United States Senate. We need people who've experienced the challenges that the body seeks to legislate. That's how we build a more prosperous United States. And so I started the Long Run PAC with the belief that the candidates who get labeled different have an opportunity to go on and make the biggest difference. My PAC is not going to be able to change the entire United States Congress. Completely understand that. But there are some very promising candidates across this country that deserve a fair shot and are not getting that fair shot. We hope to, highlight some candidates that people have not heard of before, but are in marginal races and truly, truly have a chance to win. Some competitive seats, some high profile seats, some seats that will ultimately change the trajectory of this country. And we want to be a part of it.
Yeah, hear, hear. Good on you for starting this.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So I was recently introduced to the concept of additionality, to do 2% more than what we're already doing now. Every person should do 2% more than what we're already doing now. So beyond voting, what are two things an everyday person can do in this election cycle to enhance their civic action?
To enhance the civic action, talk to other people about voting. Make it a part of your personality, because that's how important it is. Talk to people about voting. Talk to friends, family members, neighbors, and even strangers if you get an opportunity to about voting. And the other thing is to support local journalism and be in the know about what is actually happening. Know what the vote means after it's been cast. Know what positions your representatives are taking. Know how to talk about it.
Yeah, that's good advice. So as we are closing out our conversation here today, looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
I am very hopeful because of the level of engagement that we're seeing from younger people. Wisconsin had the highest youth voter turnout in the country in 22. I want to say it was about 48.5%, I think 18 to 35-year-olds, boosted by significant campus turnout. That's what makes me hopeful, knowing that young people actually are paying attention.
Yes, they're paying attention. I can tell you that I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old son, and my 20-year-old definitely voted in 22, and my 17-year-old definitely is paying very close attention. We actually had a really funny conversation about maybe one of our friends should run for office. And my older son said, well, then maybe he could be like Mitch McConnell. And then my younger son said, no, that would be so bad because the whole point is to no longer have somebody like that. The system needs to be different so we can no longer have this kind of power embedded in one person and ruin it for the rest of us.
Exactly. Completely agree. And I'm glad that your son gets it.
I think that's really encouraging. To your point, young people are paying attention, and I hope that more young people vote this year in 24.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you very much, Mandela, for joining us on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, pleasure is mine. I had a great time. Really glad we made this work.
Yes, me too. Mandela Barnes is the president of Power to the Polls Wisconsin, served as lieutenant governor of Wisconsin from 2019 to 2023, ran for Senate in 22, and founded the Long Run Political Action Committee. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Bill Weir. He's CNN's chief climate correspondent and hosted the CNN original series, The Wonderlist with Bill Weir. His first book is Life as We Know It Can Be.
Our utilities, our power companies, are the opposite of capitalism. We think we're living in a free market economy. No. These are legal monopolies where they are guaranteed a certain rate from the state or the municipality to provide this power, and their only incentive is to build out new infrastructure so they can raise rates. It's not to get more efficient. It's not to retire that old cloud-belching coal-fired power plant and come up with some new exciting energy ideas.
That's next time on Future Hindsight. And before I go, first of all, thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, you'll love what we have in store. Be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll catch all of our upcoming episodes. Thank you. Oh, and please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It seems like a small thing, but it can make a huge difference for an independent show like ours. It's the main way other people can find out about the show. We really appreciate your help. Thank you. This episode was produced by Zach Travis and me. Until next time, stay engaged.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,